What did your school waste money on that everyone hated? TVS. Like just random TVS in the hallway that showed slider shells and shit. Tens of thousands of dollars when we could just put up bulletin boards. So back when I was still in schools, we had a combined lunch of 7th and 8th, 9th, and 10th, and 11th and 12th graders sharing lunch times. The school thought it would be wise to spend a ton of money on fake mashed potatoes instead of actual mashed potatoes. This was a huge issue because the old mashed potatoes actually weren't that horrible, but some idiot helicopter mom thought her poor sissy was getting too many starches during school and raised hell. It was this unholy abomination combo of water and powdered, I don't know, something. The kids were understandably furious because they were forced to ingest this gruel that they wouldn't feed actual prisoners. Either way, it looked like mashed potatoes in a way, but it was slimy and would stick to the tables, floor, or sometimes walls. The school started to notice kids were taking spoonfuls of mashed potatoes and flinging it at the wall, making it stick. This ended up in a lot of kids getting in trouble. The janitorial staff, bless them, having to clean up a ton of what looked like Satan's cum dripping off the walls and ceilings. And finally a school-wide ban on eating mashed potatoes with spoons. Yeah, like we're going to eat mashed potatoes with forks like some basic bitch. We absolutely hated the school's decision, but for a few days it worked. Silence across the cafeteria, but there was a palpable anger for the rest of the administration. That's when it happened. I decided that enough was enough and the school needed to bring back the good mashed potatoes. I hatched a plan. With a few of the tables, we were going to all buy 3 to 4 cardboard bowls of this Newtonian concoction, and we were all going to have a huge food fight. Everyone was in on it. The school had to break out a backup 20-gallon drum of this sewer sludge and scoop it onto our plates. Kids buying this shit by the handful. We were gearing up, like it was our final march into the depths of hell, to return to Satan personally, his excess baby fluid. The attack was scheduled to begin with a simple battle cry. When the clock struck 12:01, I sounded the call to arms, with a bellowing, for mashed potatoes. I hurled the first onslaught directly into the air, like a scene from a movie. The potatoes flew across the air in slow motion. My aim was true. My trajectory lined up, as if it was fired from a cannon. I hit my mark, directly on the back of the vice principal. Before he could even turn around, it began. Screams of sheer terror by the janitorial staff as they dove behind trash bins, and Army crawled out of the door. Potato everywhere, an absolute bloodbath. We gave the intro to Saving Private Ryan a run for its money. It was pure chaos. Kids getting slammed in the face with this white mush, people ducking behind chairs, and under tables launching this gunk directly in the air without a target in sight, and yet still managing to find a mark each and every time. It was glorious. I was so proud as I stood there in the middle of it, arms raised out, gazing upon my hellish landscape. I'll never forget it. The stories of that day still get passed down from new student to new student. A day that would live in infamy. The Great Tattoo War of 2006. After having shitty computers that kept breaking down, the school received a grant. They could spend the money on whatever they wanted. They installed these fingerprint machines in the food halls so that you could top up an account with money. You would go to the machine with the money, scan your print, and then go to the food place and scan your print again to pay. This was because they claimed that it would stop kids bullying each other and stealing their money. You still had to bring the money in to put it on your account, so it made zero difference. We never did get new computers. We had chairs that you could sit on while you were waiting outside the classroom for class to start. People fucked around with the mallet, and they were trashed, so our awesome janitor volunteered to make new ones by himself to reduce costs, so the school funded the material cost. They were really nice, but they got fucked immediately, so the school ended up having to buy new ones anyway. We didn't deserve it. Our high school expanded by building another campus just off-site, rather than build a second school completely separate, which was needed. Our school had over 3,000 students. They built half of a school about a quarter mile away. All new freshmen had courses in the second campus, but many sophomores and juniors had classes at both. You'd often see kids running from one end of campus to the other, because they had 8 minutes to go from one side to the other. Fuck you if you had to go to the bathroom, or stop at your locker. Oh, and it was atop a hill, so it wasn't just a casual stroll to the other campus. It was a hike. Administrators tried to give students a little extra time, but as you can imagine, high school kids took advantage of that and would show up to class 20 minutes late every day, so they cut that out. The school enacted a policy where, if you had 3 tardies in a week, you got lunch detention. After 3 lunch detentions over any period of time, you got Saturday detention, which was 6 hours sitting in the gym on Saturday with a pissed off teacher trying to keep everyone quiet. What they should have done was keep the separate campus to freshmen only. It was big enough to contain the 700 to 800 freshmen at our school, but they fucked it up. Our physics teacher. He clearly knew nothing about what he was talking about, so over his career he developed 3 distinct techniques to make it seem like he wasn't a failure. Mr. P. 1. He would use the word govern as much as possible, as in the frequency of a swinging pendulum is governed by the mass of the object swinging. The thing is, he would say it as if it were a word that nobody else knew how to use. He'd put a particular emphasis on it and look you straight in the eye as he said it. Governed. 2. He would always look for an excuse to tell you about his old Ford that would rattle when he reached a particular speed. That, he would always say, was the resonant frequency of my Ford. And of course it's a great example, but it was the only real life example he could ever give of anything he taught us. 3. If those 2 techniques failed to convince us of his scientific prowess, he would change the subject to his failed career in football. It all boiled down to a single calf injury that, according to him, ended his career as a professional footballer before it had begun, that is. I got this. My school held some huge fundraiser to essentially extend the size of our school. They raised a lot of money and got one of our 3 main buildings built. They had a spare 100k left over, so they had 2 options. Buy air conditioning for the library and one of the other buildings, or buy one of the main execs of our school a new BMW Z3. They ended up buying the car for this bloke. A few years later it was discovered he was embezzling funds from the school. Worried about traffic on a main road through campus, they blocked it off and made it into a sort of concrete plaza. It had a lot of steps and railings, but nowhere to actually sit. There was no shade at all, so it was too hot in the summer, and in the winter the wind whistled between the buildings on either side and buried the plaza in snow. No one ever used it. In fact, out of curiosity I just checked Google Maps and it's a road, again. Lol. Here's to every time I had to weave through the narrow back roads between buildings to get from one side to the other. I was really looking forward to my second year of speech and debate too, which was competition debate. Class time was spent practicing for the 6 or small competitions we participated in. Small school, graduating class just shy of 100. A few weeks before the trimester started I was told I needed to adjust my schedule due to a class being dropped. The speech class had been removed due to budget. Our budget was only $200 and we already paid nearly every expense out of pocket. No chance to have a fundraiser, nothing. Just drop the class. That spring they started construction of our new $4 million gym. Our existing gym was structurally fine and never ran out of room for any occasion. This was the year after they spent close to $1 million classing up the football field. Fuck me for thinking academics was more important than sports. Go team. A Mac lab in my high school. It was meant to be for video editing, Photoshop, and creative projects in general. It was supposed to be for the media students only, but in the end, everyone was banned from using it because somebody stole a mouse from one of the computers. The amount of money that we spent on it could have been used to field the school's first ice hockey team, which we had wanted for more than one grad party. Our year didn't have one due to lack of funds, or just to de-ghettoize the school in general. It's not all bad though. For one, the year after, they got the hockey team going and had a grad party. The hockey team lost all 20 or so games that year. The party was apparently lame, and to this day, the school still remains ghetto. I'm sure that many of the schools mentioned here have indeed misused funds, but I feel that there's been something largely overlooked that's worth mentioning. It's incredibly common for a school, public elementary school, private research institution, or anything in between, to receive donations or grant money for very specific things. That money cannot legally be spent on anything else. If, For instance, a particularly pitifully funded school needs to purchase new textbooks for a classroom, but receives a large donation from a well-meaning local to build a shiny new pool facility. They must legally build a shiny new pool facility. It does not matter that the money was sorely needed elsewhere. The school's administration usually has no power to reappropriate funds. The goddamn outdoor classroom. Incoming rant. In grade 7 the principal spent $10,000 on ugly rocks and shit and these dumbass grassy mounds, so kids could learn outside. The school had less than 200 kids, so $10,000 was a lot of the budget. All this little piece of trash did was rot while taking up our schoolyard. Plot twist: the stupid grass mounds had baby rabbits in them that were murdered by the grubby elementary school kids and their grabbing fucking hands. Plot twist 2. Electric boogaloo: half of the rocks were on the neighboring church's property. The principal spent even more money building a giant ass fence around the church, so the school felt even more like a prison, and cut half of the playground we'd had for the past 9 years. I hope that principal ran the school into the ground after that, because she sure ruined my time there. Rant. I might need help. My college had a couple things that students continually bitched about. The flowers. It was rumored that the flower budget was around $100,000 a year. Private school, private budget, and it was pretty believable because every 2 weeks new flowers were going in, even in the winter time. The clock. This big ass ugly clock was erected right in front of our dining hall, and while I realize it was probably a gift sponsored by a donor, that money should have been allocated to something else. It even had the I instead of IV at 4 o'clock, which was irritating. The auditorium was renovated, and they installed ridiculously expensive Italian marble in the foyer. It looked fantastic, but considering we were a sports-heavy school with a small handful of artsy kids, it was a big waste. I'm in a small all-boys private school, and recently they employed a business manager who is on £45k and does nothing but buy unnecessary things. For instance, just last month he bought 80 iPad minis so that we can sign in when we arrive and leave school, which is totally not necessary and just a waste of time and money. I thought a business manager was there to budget and to manage the school's financial spending. If they get rid of him, they could be saving plenty. My district had to build a bigger high school because the one we already had was too small, and it was changed into a middle school for 7/8 graders. They hired a new company that didn't specialize in building schools to build a new high school, which was their first ever project. The school was supposed to be 3 stories in the shape of a square. They messed up the ground level, and the second and third floors were in the shape of a U. To recap, the school was supposed to be 3 floors in the shape of a square. The ground floor is a square and the second and third floors are U-shaped. The reason everyone hated it was because it was harder to get to your classes if you were on the other side of the school. A new building. They paid about £75 million for Stephen Hull to design an absolutely awful, boxy, echo chamber that has more circulation than studio space. Then their old building, which was considered the best building in the UK for the past 250 years, burned down. It's absolutely hilarious how much of a clusterfuck my university was, but that's what you get for going to art school, though I studied architecture. The entire school. My high school was originally incorporated and built in the 1950s and was built in the trend-setting open campus model. Every classroom led outdoors, and the gym/auditorium was a completely separate building. It was the school my father graduated from. By the time I got there in 2000, it was dripping with character, quite literally, from every faucet, hole in the ceiling, and geysers spurting up from the floor in the math wing. But fuck, did we love that school. We had complete run of it. Murals everywhere, freedom, encouragement, actually, to go outside between classes. We were encouraged to use the outside paths because the hallway was too crowded, and it was literally impossible to get to one end of the school to the other in the 6 minutes allotted between classes. Eat your lunch outside in the courtyard because there's not enough tables and seats in the cafeteria. But we owned that school. But looming behind was a $51 million, state-of-the-art facility that opened up my junior year. It really was beautiful. Olympic-sized pool, 4-court field house with indoor track, 32-inch TV in every classroom, brand new football field, etc., etc. And we hated it. We weren't allowed outside. There was a fully enclosed courtyard that we weren't allowed out in for security reasons. We weren't even allowed to have bottled water outside of the cafeteria for fear of messing up the brand new $51 million state-of-the-art facility. The custodians were actually instructed to go through classroom trash bins and report any food wrappers. I had a teacher who would take his home in his briefcase. My fellow class officers and I fought administration tooth and nail to be allowed to have our graduation on the football field, as had always been tradition, to deaf ears, because it would ruin the field. At the end of that first year, during the senior class night, they showed the senior documentary, and at one point, they showed footage of the old school, and all the students cheered, and then booed the next frame, when they showed the new school. My mom, who had actually served on the building committee, was livid at how ungrateful we were. But how do you explain that to us that knew both? The old school meant freedom, while the new school felt like a very fancy prison? In any case, it was only my class and the ones surrounding that ever knew. My sister and her class never knew any different, and fuck, the freshmen there now weren't even alive when the old school was still standing.